This episode is brought to you by Instant Impact. Instant Impact provides transformative talent solutions to small and mid-sized companies that are making between 30 and 500 hires each year. If your recruitment's giving you a headache and you don't know where to start, then give the team at Instant Impact a call or visit www.instant-impact.com for more information. Hello and welcome to We Need to Talk About HR. I'm your host, Felix Mitchell. One of the most elusive challenges that business leaders face is how to create an environment of sustainable high performance to get the most out of every individual in your business, whilst making all of those people into something that is greater than the sum of those individuals. To see this in action, you need look no further than your TV on the weekend at the World of Elite Sports. They seem to have cracked the code.
So that's why we're bringing you a series with experts from various professional sports to teach us about what they've learned over their careers and how they're applying it in the world of business. So our guest today is Will Fraser. He's the founder of the consultancy 101st and an ex-professional rugby player who played for the Saracens. So Will spent his whole life understanding what it takes to perform under pressure, and he's here to share those insights with us. Will, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
So Will, I'd love it if you could just share at a really high level what it is you guys do at 101st, what you've learned from sports, and how you're working with some of your clients to apply that into the world of business.
Yeah, so 101st, I suppose we frame ourselves as a people and culture consultancy. So we're very explicit in the fact that we can't come into any organisation and tell anyone how to be any better at their job because we've never done their job. We've never worked in our own organisation. So we very much come in and look at, well, what comes before the actual job itself. And fundamentally, that's how do we help a group of people function as well as they can do as a group of people. So that's things like resilience, cohesion, communication, values, this higher purpose, this is what are we actually all fighting towards, what we all align towards. And if we get that snowball rolling, then consequentially people become better at their jobs because they can have better conversations, they have a deeper level of understanding, there's more shared understanding across the group, they have more clarity in what we're trying to do and what we're trying to achieve. And that was all kind of born out of, as you say, my experience playing for Saracens. So I played for the club during a very unique time where we won a lot of trophies, a lot of games, heavily caveated by it had absolutely nothing to do with me. It was very much kind of right place, right time, and I managed to get on the train. But really, that success was almost entirely brought out of this very deliberate plan of actually what we're trying to do here is build connection. The kind of deeper level of connection we have within the group, the better understanding we have of each other as people, the better understanding we have of each other as rugby players, the more clarity we have in the game plan and what we're trying to do, how we're trying to do it. And then that gives us the ability to actually execute that thing under pressure. And I think what you see across sport and business and organizations is the opposite of that. And we get trapped into these myths and assumptions about what creates performance and what's important when building teams, when actually the complete opposite is true. So for example, when you look in sport, particularly in football, there's this huge war for talent when essentially it's clubs going to market, spending an exorbitant amount of money trying to buy the best talent. And very rarely does that actually work. And when you look at teams that have sustainable success over time, what they've actually been able to do is to bring a core group of players through a system and hold on to the players for a long period of time, have huge amounts of shared understanding across the group. Their cohesion data is through the roof. And what they're actually able to do is make less errors than the opposition. And there's numerous examples that I won't go into now because I'm sure we'll get into later on in the pod. But there's numerous examples where we see that play out on both sides of the coin.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So before we go into all those examples, what is it about sport that makes it that, because there are lots of these examples of, I suppose, professional sports teams that have invested that time and that effort into the relationships, a certain way of working or a culture or values or something like that. And then it has a huge impact on them. They become wildly successful and they write a book about it and everyone does, very well off the back of it. What is it about sports that make it such a good environment for those sorts of lessons?
I think it's it's very intense and it's very exaggerated. So you spend a huge amount of time with the same group of people. And the nature of what you're doing with those people is, as I say, is very intense. You know, you're going through a lot of shared adversity, shared challenge, shared success, and it repeats itself quite quickly. So the biggest difference in sport to business is you've got a game every weekend. So you have that very visceral example of whether is what we're doing working or is it not working.
Yeah, it's like you win or you lose.
You win or you lose, or even not win or lose it from the performance. Are we actually shifting the dial and how we want to play and what we're trying to do, kind of whether we win or lose the game. But either way, you get that very kind of quick acid test every weekend of whether that's working. So what that allows you to do is iterate, I think, a lot quicker and a lot more effectively than you can in business, because you know what you're iterating on. Whereas in business, depends how companies set up their reviews or whatever it is, whether it's rarely less than quarterly, you know, and it's at least annually. So you don't get as many, it's not the frequency of those check-ins and the ability to iterate and have that conversation. And then what you also get in sport is, well, I can only talk about on the behalf of the team that I played for and the players that I played with and know, is actually the conversations are much more meaningful. So you're really getting into the weeds of, well, who do we want to be as a team? What do we want to stand for? How do we want to play the game? Do we all agree that this is the way we're going to go about it? Whereas in business, because there's lots of different routes as to how someone's ended up working for an organization, everyone's coming in with their own baggage, their own legacy, their own motivations, their own opinions on why this job is important or not important. And then you have this huge system that we operate under, where we might have shareholders, we've got the board, we've got the C-suite who have their own interpretations of things. And that comes down the hierarchy. So actually, we don't have the ability to have those types of conversation in business that we do in sports, where we can actually get into the weeds it, because the perception is we don't have enough time. And it's this myth that we don't have enough time, when actually it's we always have enough time. It's the question is how are we going to use our time? And that comes down, as at the start, this trap of performance, whereby we go after all these short-term fixes and we never actually get to the root cause of, well, why is this actually not happening? Because it's clearly not to do with talent, because we've got a lot of talented people here. It's clearly not to do with tech or process, because we've got all the platforms, we've got a lovely office, got all these sorts of things. So what is it that's actually stopping us getting there? And I think the reason why people don't kind of dive that layer or that level deeper is because to do that means we can't send those emails. We can't have those meetings, because these conversations are going to take time.
That's really interesting. I wonder, is it a tool that you use to kind of manufacture a game day as like an opportunity to analyze how the teams you work with are performing? And just thinking, because you're right, that's such like a visceral time. Like, okay, well, you watch, I don't know, whatever it is, an hour and a half of reality, and you're saying, well, how are these things we're putting in place working? It is, I wonder whether you could manufacture that, or whether you do manufacture that with the kind of companies that you work with. You know, snapshot today, how's it all working? So you create that cadence of iteration that you were talking about before.
So I suppose in a way we do, but not, we wouldn't frame it as such. It's much more, a lot of the work we do is quite ground zero, in the sense that, you know, let's say we work with clients where they're bringing new kind of op models or IT op models, whatever it might be. And this is their kind of fifth or sixth time of bringing in a new IT op model, because the other ones didn't work for a plethora of reasons. And it's not a great analogy, but it's this analogy of, when we try and bring in these changes and these iterations, most of the time in the corporate world, it's like planting a plant without loosening the soil. It's incredibly difficult to get it in, and the roots aren't going to take, and all these sorts of things. So actually what we look at as well, we're the soil looseners, for want of a better phrase. And actually it's this whole bit of, to your point, I suppose the match that you're referring to is actually us coming and going, before we even start to think about this thing we're going to change, or this new thing we're trying to bring in, we have to have this explicit acceptance and understanding of, well, where are we now?
Yeah.
Like, what do we actually do now, culture operationally, that would help this thing work? What do we do that will detract from it working? Or what don't we do that if we did do it? And trying to get that level of understanding. And then when we look at the team dynamics element, it's an understanding where within all of that, what are the myths and assumptions that we currently hold that are going to stop this thing from getting to where we need it to get to? because those conversations very rarely, if ever, happen, and they are the fundamental reasons why these things don't work. But it's a classic case of we spend an exorbitant amount of money building this new model or a reorg, whatever it might be. It doesn't work. So we either sack the person that came up with the idea, bring someone new in, then they bring their own model and their own reorg in, or we go and pay a huge amount more money again and get another new model or do another restructure, whatever it might be, when that's not the problem. We often say in many ways, you could have the worst model in the world, but if everyone has a crystal clear understanding of what that model is, how it's going to work, how it impacts them, what they need to do with it, you're infinitely better than having the best model in the world and no one knowing what the hell it means to them.
Let's talk then about what the sort of foundations of high performance are. I'd love to kind of get the 101st methodology in a nutshell.
I always hesitate to use the phrase high performance because it's on every single LinkedIn post. Everyone's saying they want to build a high performance culture and all this.
What's better, Will? Tell me.
Well, unfortunately, I haven't come up with something better yet, so that's why I still kind of have to use it, I suppose. But I think it's almost become a bit of an oxymoron because, people use it all the time without, I don't think, truly understanding what it is, where it comes from, therefore how it manifests itself, therefore how do we actually drive it. Now, I suppose when you look at performance and you look at teams that are truly high performing, they have a competitive advantage, right? Every team's high performer has a competitive advantage, and by definition, a competitive advantage has to be difficult to copy. Otherwise, it wouldn't be competitive and it wouldn't be an advantage. So anything that requires money, by definition, isn't a competitive advantage, because as soon as someone else gets the same amount of money or more money, they can buy the same thing. They can steal your talent. They can go and buy better tech. They can upgrade their office. So therefore, when you dive into it, you go, well, what is something that doesn't require money or directly require money that is a competitive advantage? And actually, it comes back to understanding. It's how well do we understand what we're trying to do compared to how well did they understand what they're trying to do? Can we therefore execute that understanding better under fatigue and pressure than they can? And that's the thing that actually sets us apart. So at Saracens, we were playing, we had this very kind of clear moment where we essentially looked at, you look at the other clubs in the league who are obviously our direct competitors, and you look at it and you go, well, we're all doing the same training. We're all watching the same videos off the same data sets. We're all lifting the same weights in the gym. So how are we any different? And so we made the decision, well, actually, our point of difference is going to be our level of understanding of each other and what we're trying to do and how we're going to do it. And then being able to actually do that under time, pressure, and skills. When you look at really successful sports teams, often they have very simple game plans, and often they set themselves up in very simple, clear ways. They just do what they do so well that no one else can break it down and no one else can beat it. And even when other teams try and copy it, it never works, because actually it's not the formation, it's not the actual game plan that's the difference. It's how deeply and well the players understand what they're doing and how well they can do it under pressure. That's the difference. So I think when we come down to what is performance, fundamentally it's connection and understanding. So we use a phrase that a partner of ours, Gainline Analytics, have coined, and it's teams are not units of skill but expressions of shared understanding. So again, how often in sport do you see it where we spend huge amounts of money on players and coaches only for them to come in and flop, in inverted commas? And it very rarely works. And then how many other teams do we see that don't have superstars but actually perform very, very well or bat way above their average where they should do? And that comes in because these amazingly talented players are coming into very bad systems. Whereas you have probably averagely talented players playing in very good systems. So Dave Jones, who's a psychologist at Saracens, when I was there, we use him a lot in 101st. He's worked for Mercedes Formula One, Premier League, and he often says, a bad system beats a good player every single time. And that's true for business as well. A bad system, you could buy the most talented salesperson, IT, or whatever it might be. If they come into a bad system, they'll be as average as everyone else. And the same is then true in reverse, where if you have a really good system, you could bring someone that's quite average in terms of their talent and skill level and raise them way above where they ever thought they could be, because we don't actually own all of our talent in inverted commas. It belongs to the people we work with, systems we work within, culture, geography, all those things.
I know what a player is. I know what a team member is. What's a system?
So a system is without repeating the word, the system in which we operate, right? So Instant Impact will operate within a system. So that system is internally, actually, how do we communicate with each other? What is the organizational structure? What are the external factors that impact us and what we do? What are the assumptions? What are the myths that people hold within the organization? What do we tell each other? What don't we tell each other? You then operate within a wider system, which is your industry and your sector. That again will have external influences on it, what you can and can't do, who you can and can't talk to, all these sorts of things that we never ever think about when it comes to our performance as an organization. So there's loads of examples, again, in sport where New Zealand All Blacks are a great example, the most successful sporting team in the world, bar none. But yet there's an amazing statistic about whenever an All Black player moves overseas, particularly to Europe, they never play at the same level that they were when they were with the All Blacks. So much so that the Toulon owner bought an All Black international, over 50 caps, loads of tries, and generally thought that they signed. He had a twin brother that he'd hidden away, and they signed the twin brother. And he was asking for a DNA test. Now it's probably semi-ingest, semi-truth, but the point is that when you play New Zealand, the system is incredible. You look at the Canterbury Crusaders, rugby team based in Christchurch. I think they've won or been in essentially every other Super Rugby final that's ever existed. They've won more Super Rugby trophies than any other team in the competition. They've produced the most All Blacks than any other club team in New Zealand. Now, Christchurch is about the size of Reading. Now, if Reading was constantly winning the Premier League and producing England players year in, year out, we'd all be going to Reading going, well, what the hell is going on here? Like, what you teach your kids. But when you look at the system, every single school side, every single grassroots club side is funneled into one university. That one university is funneled into one professional team. That one professional team is then funneled into the All Blacks. So by the time you make your debut for Christchurch, you've probably been playing together since you were 12, 13 years old. So that level of shared understanding. So when you make your debut there, your level of shared understanding within that team is far greater than mine would have been or someone else's would have been had we come in, because we would have come through a different system. So when we look at organizations, we don't take these things into account as to why maybe we're underperforming. We just look at the really binary, we're not hitting our numbers, that's because of X, when actually that often exacerbates the problem than actually solves it.
So that's super interesting. So let's take it to the world of work then. You've got an organization that's, maybe it's not a catastrophe, but they're just not having the growth that they expect. And they've hired in a couple of salespeople and both of them have failed. That kind of vibe. I'm sure you see that the whole time.
Mm-hmm.
How can you figure out what your system is, what the myths and truths and ways of working of the organization are? How do you start unpicking all of that?
So I'm going to give a really basic answer, then we'll drill into it. Is you have a conversation about it. That's if I was going to be really blunt about it, that's it. So, but that's not as easy as it sounds, because if you've never had that conversation, having that conversation is not an easy one to have. How do you make time for it? This, that, and the other. So that's kind of why we do what we do. So when we come in and we unpick these things, what we do is we bring in someone from a different walk of life, but has all the knowledge about this. So we bring in David Jones, the sports psychologist, who comes in, uses sport as that initial kind of door opener, then we talk a lot about the research and the data anecdotally. And essentially what we do is unpick what team dynamics are and where performance comes from. And essentially the conversation we've just had. And in allowing people to hear that messaging, it's incredibly tangible. It resonates massively because it's really obvious how these things kind of cross over. And then it allows people, gives people the validation and freedom to go, cool, well, that's what happens here. When I first started here, no one came up to me and actually, I didn't know who to go to for this problem. I didn't know who to talk to. And the problem when we don't have the knowledge, we don't have understanding, that gap gets filled with assumptions. And then all the decisions we made are made on assumptions, not on knowledge or understanding. And then they compound over time. It's like if you're on the golf course, or when I'm on the golf course and I slice a ball, the longer the ball's in the air for, the further right it goes. And it's the same with assumptions. The longer they're left untouched, a myth, the longer they're left untouched and unchallenged, unspoken about, the bigger they get and deeper they get. So much so that what we find with some clients is there are fundamental decisions being made about the organization and people that are being made on nothing.
Wow, that's so...
They're being made on assumptions that have never been actually challenged or have never been spoken about. And when you open them up, everyone's like, are you kidding me? No, that's not at all what we think is happening. Or why are you doing that? Like, that's not...
Yeah, I was going to say, like, without, I mean, obviously you've got some confidentiality and things like that, but
Yes. Yeah.
without breaking any of that trust, Will, I'd love it because I'm sort of resonating on one level with you and thinking like, oh, I'm sure there are things like that in my business. But could you give us a bit of an example of a myth that could then lead to a business decisions being made?
Yeah. So we had one with a client where you have a lot. What you often get, particularly in big organizations, the bigger the organization, the more these things manifest themselves because there's a plethora of more gaps for assumption to find itself, and you get it hierarchically. So you'll get it a lot between levels of an organization. So what you find is the SLT will make let's say a team's not performing or the middle management aren't performing in inverted commas to how the SLT think they should be. There would be an immediate assumption from the SLT as to why that is without necessarily having that conversation. That message gets passed down, then the middle management immediately create an assumption about the SLT because of the message that's come down, because there's not been that conversation. But those things never get expressed to each other because the middle management say, well, I can't pipe up because if I say anything, I'm going to annoy my SLT member. I want to kind of work my way through. So you get what we call, can I swear?
Yeah.
You get what we call a bullshit production. So the SLT member will say, this is what we think is going on. This is what we think you should do. Blah, 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 blah. And the person taking the information will go, yeah, absolutely, Felix. No problem at all. Bang on it. Close the door. Go to your desk. He doesn't have a clue what he's talking about. He has no idea what my job looks like on the ground. That's never going to work. But we don't say it because of fear of judgment and all these things that come along with it. That then exacerbates over time. And with one particular client, that had manifested itself so badly that it was, it got to a point it was relatively toxic, and there's a lot of other stuff going on, and we just kind of broke it down. And my challenge was always on both sides of the wall was when an assumption came out, my challenge back was, do you know that that's the case, or do you think that that's the case? If you know that's the case, that means you've had this exact conversation, you've got that outcome, and therefore we can make decisions off the back of that. If you think this is the case, that means you haven't had this explicit conversation. Therefore, what you're going to do is being done on an assumption and is incredibly risky because we don't know what the outcome of that is. So actually, we need to go and have that conversation. And in having that conversation, what lots of people found was obviously their assumptions were completely wrong and fundamentally changed their view on that person they were talking to on both sides of the fence. And that's a bigger example, but you find it all the time in terms of, there's research done and studies done in kind of League One football where manager will be presenting the game plan for the weekend and they'll get all the players to go off into separate rooms and write down their interpretation of the game plan, and no two are the same. And so there's this variance in understanding. And so they're all going to go on a training pitch and do what they think is the right thing, which is slightly different to what you think it is, which is slightly different to what this person thinks it is.
And then it compounds and compounds and compounds.
Then it compounds. So we get to the game and someone's hoiked a long ball when everyone else is going, why have you done that? We're going to shift it out to the wing here. And he goes, oh, but I thought from what and you see it all in emails, another prime example. So I think there's a bit of the research done on emails where a sample group sent a ton of emails and they said, what do you think the percentage level of understanding is going to be from the recipient? And this email sender guessed about 90%. From the receiver's point of view, it was about 70%, which is still decent, but there's a 20% gap there. So the errors then come in that 20% gap of variance. They do Mr. and Mrs. with couples as well, the stag and hen do type games. And again, the issue is how well we think someone understands what we're saying compared to how well they actually understand what we're saying. And it's in that gap is where all the errors happen, is where you thought we were doing this, I thought we were doing that, the thing we're trying to do doesn't happen.
Well, have we got worse at having those conversations in business since the rise of more remote working?
I haven't seen it research, to suggest that. So I'd hesitate to give a kind of conclusive answer. And also, I'm definitely not the person to give a conclusive answer.
All right, what do you think? It doesn't have to be no, Will.
I don't know. Anecdotally, I wouldn't say that would be the reason why. I would say from the clients we work with and the challenges we see, The actual biggest issue is this perception that we don't have enough time to do it. Because it's the opportunity cost of it. In order to have those conversations, I said at the start, to have this conversation, that means I'm not sending emails. To go and have this, try and get this level of understanding and clarity, that means that maybe I have to drop that client meeting or whatever it might be. And it's the opportunity cost that people aren't prepared to take. And also, it's this bullshit production where you'll talk to any organization, any founder, any leader, anyone, and you'll say, look, to have a really sustainable team that's going to kind of really shift the dial on what you're doing, they need to really understand each other, understand what they're doing, how they're going to do it, be able to do it under pressure. And that comes from a level of connection that you need to build. Everyone will go, no shit, Sherlock, obviously. But no one does it. Because it's like, but to do that, I can't do this. So it's this thing we say it's really important and we give credence to it in sessions and workshops and meetings. But when push comes to shove and we have to make a decision between doing that and doing this, often we'll do this. And we'll go and that's the reality of the world.
It's so interesting. I mean, we just had a session at Instant Impact yesterday, actually, where we had a consultant trainer come in, and one of the first stats he gave us was that in mid-sized businesses in the UK, they average 2 minutes of training per employee per year.
Wow.
Which is
but that feeds into it, right? And the thing is as well, it's like, I think a lot of it is also, and it's not saying, and no one gets this absolutely bang on, like no one gets it right. It's just, again, using sport as a great analogy, we're not trying to be the perfect team. We're just trying to be better than the other 9.
Yeah.
And I think, again, people get lost in this myth that everything has to operate perfectly. And in trying to get everything to operate perfectly, nothing operates adequately. It's trying to please everyone, we please no one, that kind of adage. And so it's really drilling in on actually, well, what is it we're trying to do? Do we all genuinely understand what that is? And that's the first question, right? Because people will have variances on what that is. Do we actually all genuinely understand what it is we're trying to do? And particularly in kind of founder, and I'm finding this even now in our own organization, having to really be crystal clear and get that level of understanding from people and their perceptions and all this sort of stuff, is because as a founder, it's very easy to get in your own head. Because you started it, you get this thing called the curse of knowledge. I know everything we're trying to do because it was my idea, and therefore when we talk to other people about it, we almost triage the information that we think they need to hear, which often isn't. They often need the stuff that we think is not important, because we forget how basic is, and forget that once I didn't know this either, and again you get into this cycle again where if they don't know the information, they're just going to assume what it could be. And the assumptions are 99.9% wrong or not wholly right. So therefore, you get the golf ball thing again, where it just keeps going right.
That's so interesting. Well, so I've got a bit of an eye on time here, but we got people listening and they're thinking, yeah, this definitely resonates. I mean, obviously they can give you guys a call at 101st.
Yeah, that would be the first option.
Leave the link in the show. But budgets are tight these days, and we're all under pressure to do more with less. What are the first steps to remedying these conversations? Now, you said have the conversation. I guess that's the umbrella. But what's actually step number 1 on that journey?
Yeah, so obviously I said that fairly facetiously, and kind of dumbed it down. But so I think
it's all right. You explained it afterwards, Will. I think.
Yeah. I think firstly, what people need to do, especially if you're in any sort of leadership role, is check your own assumptions on things. And the best way of checking your own assumptions is actually talking to the people around you. So talking to your team and being very explicit in, listen, this is my interpretation of what we're trying to do with, say, this particular project, whatever it might be. This is my interpretation of what we're trying to do here. And this is what I'm thinking. I need to understand from you what you think and if it's the same or if it's not. Because if there's any variance in it, that's where the assumptions creep in, and that's where we're not going to get quite to where we want to get to. So I think those sorts of conversations, but we talk a lot around the concept of social capital. So again, a lot of clients we talk to will be like, we try and have these conversations. I say to my team all the time, I tell them to challenge me. I tell them to be honest in meetings and no one says a word. And it's kind of like, are we really expected to, just because you tell them to challenge you, do you really think they're going to challenge you? Like, you're their boss, you're the CEO. Like, it doesn't, unfortunately, life's not that simple. They'll only challenge you once they actually fully accept and understand that you're not going to shit on them for doing it, right? And that actually they're not going to be judged for.
You have to earn that trust.
Yeah, you have to, exactly that. And that doesn't just happen. And again, this goes back to the myth of time. People just think because we go to the pub on a Thursday after work, or because we go bowling once a quarter, whatever it might be, that, yeah, we really trust each other. And the thing with trust, a lot of trust can be a bullshit production, you know, and it's going, well, actually, do we really trust each other? So, and again, I would say even before trust, it's just, do we actually understand each other? Do you actually get why I'm doing what I'm doing or what my rationale is? Do you, you know, we talk a lot around kind of motivation. The motivation is a really interesting one because it's like interviews. Prime example, right? So when we interview someone, when we're looking to bring someone in to our organizations, we vet them as much as we possibly can. We go to their social media, we try and understand them as deeply as we can to make sure we're bringing the right person. The second we hire them, we never have those conversations with them again.
Yeah, that's true.
Do you know what I mean? It's mad. And it's like we go through this whole rigmarole of doing this, but then and the argument is actually, it's once they're in, that's when it's even more important to be having these conversations. But we just stop because we make the assumption of, cool, we've done that now, we know them, they're in. And again, using sport, when I was playing in the academy, my only motivation was to get a first team contract. And once I got a first team contract, it was to become a core part of the starting 15. Once I managed that a few times, it was then looking towards playing for England. Once that didn't happen, it was then going, cool, well, how do I end my career? So your motivations change throughout a career.
Yeah.
Any career. You know, it doesn't matter what that career is, but we only have that conversation once, if that. And your motivation while you're doing what you're doing directly dictates how you then interact with the people you're doing it with, you know, and therefore how they can interact with you to be effective. But we never have that conversation. So social capital we talk about is almost the currency of cohesion. It is the understanding of not how much do we like each other, because if I'm getting you to like me, that's a complete bullshit production. So I'm just going to find out what you like and really tap into that, even if I don't like it. So it's understanding. So how well do you and I understand each other? And if we have that level of understanding, that then allows me to go, Felix, I don't actually think that's right. Or we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work. Whereas without that understanding, there's no way I'm putting my hand up in a meeting in front of 50 other people and calling you out. So it's that, but again, everything kind of bottlenecks back to time. Is actually, are we prepared to give these things the time it needs?
It all comes back to create the space and take the time and have the conversation, and then everything else kind of builds from there.
Yeah, and the worst thing you can do with this is start it and then ditch it. So what the challenge we always say to people after we work with them is, when you do this, the worst thing you can do is when shit hits the fan, you're in a crisis, is drop this, because what you're subconsciously telling everyone is that this was one big, massive bullshit production. You know, and actually in times of crisis, very counterintuitively, this is the thing we need to be doubling down on, because if it's actually the understanding we have of everything we've said before, that's the thing that gets us out of this problem. Not going and pumping out 100 emails to try and get a last minute sale to hit my monthly numbers. You know, and then we get to a whole another conversation about incentives, but we won't have time.
Well, we don't have time for that. Well, listen, man, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a really interesting conversation and lots of food for thought.
Awesome. Thank you very much for having me. It's been good.